Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on Healthy Leader, Healthy Team. I've been sending links to you individually to the resilience workbook, so you should find that in the chat box if you haven't been there already. That link will take you directly to the resilience workbook on our website. There's no form you need to fill in. It'll take you directly to a PDF. I would invite you to save that PDF to your computer. We're going to be using it in this webinar and also in the subsequent 2 webinars. It's focused on resilience. It's been a great resource we've used with many of our clients over the last few months, and we're delighted to share it with you today. So if you haven't received that or you can't find that, please do type into the chat to Angela and I, and we'll make sure you get that link. But thank you very much for joining. It's a pleasure to have you here. As you know, we are the Innovation Beehive. I think most of you on the call today have been on previous webinars, so I won't dwell on this, but we focus on 3 areas when we work with clients. We focus on innovation, culture, and leadership. So we're focusing on leadership today. But the key thing, the golden thread that draws those together, is we apply innovation principles and practice to solve challenges in culture, in leadership, and of course, in innovation. And I think the next slide is going to tell you some of the clients we've worked with. So you can see there's a real breadth of clients that we've worked with. And I think that's important in the context of what we're talking about today, because leadership is different in different sectors. And we've drawn together the best practice that we have seen when we've been working with our clients, from the people we interviewed when we created the white paper on leadership that we released last year, just before the pandemic. And we can see that there are real synergies across the great leadership that we see across these different sectors. Oh, and by the way, just to say, if you'd like to add yourself to this list of our clients, feel free to get in touch with me today. Be delighted to have you with us. So we're going to dive straight into the content today. But before we do that, I'd like to just introduce Angela. Angela, hello. Sorry.
Hi, Joe. That's absolutely fine. You're so keen to get into it. I know, because we're really excited to share what we've got to share with you today. For those who don't know me, my name's Angela. I'm the People and Innovation Director at the Innovation Beehive. My focus is on leadership and culture and supporting all those organizations that Joe shared. I used to work as a therapist as well, so always been very interested in supporting people with their mental health, which we're going to talk about later on.
Thanks, Angela. Great. So now diving into the content, those of you who've been on a webinar with us before will have seen this slide. And I think it's really important to just reflect on where we've been, particularly when we're thinking about leading in health, because we have all been through a lot over the last 12 to 15, 16 months. But I think it's important to recognize that this COVID crisis that we've experienced isn't the only crisis that we're going to experience in our leadership lives. There are going to be challenges. There's going to be constant uncertainty. There's a great quote that the one thing you can be certain of is that uncertainty is going to be your certainty. That's not the quote, but it'll do. So just a whistle-stop tour of some of the emerging trends that we think are going to impact on leadership over the coming years and decades. Top left, obviously, the fallout from the COVID pandemic. We seem to be coming through it, certainly in the global north. I saw a shocking statistic about the number of people who've been vaccinated in the global north versus the global south yesterday. So there is still a huge amount of work to do to enable the world to get through the COVID pandemic. But we're on that journey. And then, of course, you can see an iceberg falling into the sea. I think I saw an article on the weekend that said the biggest iceberg ever has just broken away from Antarctica. So that's quite telling in terms of climate change and the impact that is going to have on our environment, but also on the nature of our work, on the nature of our business, moving towards renewables, the nature of opportunities that might be presented to businesses in the future. So climate change is going to have a huge impact on the way we lead and the way we work. There's changes to the way we work. So you can see somebody on the bottom left corner there, you can see a Zoom meeting. A lot of people are talking about hybrid working. That's something that is likely to change the way we work and change the way that we interact and engage with our teams. And I think that's a key point, that actually we need to make sure that we are still leading our teams in health in the midst of this change to the way we work. And how do we do that effectively? There's changes to the way we engage with companies. So the way our customers engage with us, the way we engage with companies that we work with. You know, a massive move towards online retail, which already started before the pandemic, but has been accelerated by the pandemic. There's changes to the way we socialize. You can see people having a drink there, wearing masks. You know, that's likely to continue for the foreseeable into the medium term. But how might that change? How might this experience of the pandemic change the way that people socialize going forward? And how might it change the way we interact with our teams, for example? And finally, perhaps the biggest risk and the biggest uncertainty that faces us is the seemingly relentless march of digital disruption. You know, whether you hear it called machine learning, big data, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, augmented reality, virtual reality, all of these words that collectively can be called Industry 4.0. And that's where the phrase that we use to describe this form of leadership comes from. Leadership 4.0 is the ability to lead through the unprecedented uncertainty that will come through ever accelerating digital disruption. So we're going to dive straight into thinking about how we can lead in health in the context of uncertainty. And Angela's going to talk us through the first tool that we're going to engage with, which, by the way, isn't the first tool in the workbook.
Thanks, Joe. That's going to be my favourite quote from now on then. The only certainty in life is uncertainty. That's how it feels at the moment. So how do we cope with all this uncertainty? Well, as Joe said, one of the tools we want to share with you or remind you of, because you may well have seen this before, and it's certainly one that I found really life-changing when I first came across it, because it really sort of released my brain and released my energy once I got my head around this. And it's just a wonderful concept of thinking of your life captured within 3 circles. And then the first circle is, what can you actually control in life? What is actually within your power to control whilst all this uncertainty is going on? And what we invite you to do, if you have downloaded the workbook, or just do it on a piece of paper now, is just capture the things in your life that you can directly impact. So just really focus on what choices you can make. So you can choose. So I chose this morning, because it's leading in health, I chose the healthiest green smoothie I could lay my hands on. So you can choose what time you get up in the morning, what time you go to bed at night. You can choose what you use to help you sleep at night, what food you eat. You can choose up to a point how many meetings you can have in a day. So in terms of, you know, everything in life, what is within your direct power? So I'm going to give you a minute or two just to capture that and think about what you can control.
I should say as well, the PDF that you downloaded through that link is actually interactive, so you should be able to type into it using any PDF reader that you have on your computer. I can't vouch for every PDF reader in existence, but hopefully the ones you have will enable you to do that. But also, of course, as Angela said, you can always print this out or just grab a scrap of paper and think about it on there.
I'm a printer offer and using my favorite pencil kind of person. But it means you can keep updating it and keep adding to it too.
Absolutely. I'm going to pause the animation because it's making my eyes hurt a little bit. What do you think?
I was going to say, what I'm controlling is ignoring the animation. Because my daughter's got a maths test this morning.
I'm going to stop it.
I was going to say, my daughter's got a maths test this morning, so I'm trying not to think of that. Because I can choose to do that. That's within my control.
Absolutely. So folks, you've had a few moments to think about that. I wonder if you'd like to type into the chat. Perhaps let's think how we do this. So if you type the letter C, the letter I, or the letter A next to the item that you've put into the different spheres, and then we can kind of respond to and reflect on some of the things that you've put in there. So we've had someone come back and say one of the things they can control is their weight and their fitness. Yeah, absolutely. And their diet. Someone else, in terms of their sphere of control, what I spend and what I eat, and my time. Yeah, that's within my sphere of control. My relationship with my family is something that I can influence. That's interesting, because obviously what I'd like to draw out there actually is that the things that within our sphere of control, the people have identified there, maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, but most of those are things that only involve us. That's quite an important principle. And then when we get into relationships with other people, then we start to have to think about things like it's within our influence because I am only one half of this dynamic. So actually, the response that people give me affects how I feel about that relationship. So it's a really good example there to draw out. How many meetings I have is something I can influence. Yeah. And I think there was someone said that they can control their time. I think to an extent, time is based on relationships, particularly in a work context, because people may be vying for your time and trying to take you in different directions. So maybe that is actually something we can influence in the same way that we can only influence how many meetings that we have. We can always say no, but we also have to think about the impact of saying no on our relationships. So things to control your thoughts, feelings, behaviors, time, lifestyle, career choices, my attitude and my outlook to life. Thank you very much, Manpreet. That's great. Very comprehensive. And what I like about that actually is that there's another great quote which I'm probably going to botch, like I botched the last one. But you can control how you respond, but you can't control what happens to you. It's the other way around, but that's fine. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control your response. And I think you've summed that up perfectly there with thoughts, feelings, behaviors, attitude, and outlook.
The things that Manpreet's talking about there are very much kind of skills you can develop, because sometimes it is so easy to react to things that are going on around you, but taking time out to say, no, stop, this isn't productive. How can I respond to this? And they're skills worth developing, because it just builds your levels of control, your circles of control and circles of influence.
And here's an interesting point that I've never thought of before, again from Manpreet. We can control our actions, but not the consequences. That's really interesting. We can think about the consequences and seek to make the best course. Wow, I feel like we could get into a philosophical discussion about that. Is it about cause or effect? That's fascinating. A couple of things in the acceptance sphere. So other people's beliefs and attitudes, you have to accept them. You may be able to influence them to an extent, but as they say, the hardest thing to change is other people. Accepting that I have an illness that won't go away, but I can control taking my medicine and my diet. Absolutely, that's brilliant. And that, I think, is a great example of showing the interrelatedness between these different spheres. There are certain things we have to accept. If it's a chronic illness, it's a chronic illness, but then we can control how we manage it and how we manage our lives around it. Brilliant. Yeah, that's great. Now, I think one of the other things that I think is worth considering when it comes to leading in health around this tool is what I've just done when you've all shared your responses to this with me. Well, we've had a sort of dialogue, and I know it's a slightly strange dialogue because you're chatting and I'm talking. But what you can always do with this is get your team to do this together and then share your responses as a team. And in doing that, you might find that people are able to open up opportunities. So if somebody has put something into the sphere of acceptance, well, there might be actually someone else in the team who says, well, actually, I do this. And then you can bring it into the sphere of influence. So this is quite a useful tool to use with your wider team or with some friends if you don't have a team yourself, and just get someone else's perspective. Two sets of eyes are better than one, and more sets of eyes are better than two. So yeah, it's a brilliant tool.
Particularly good for if people are feeling a bit overwhelmed by what's going on, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's focused on like, what can I control? Because I can't control the pandemic spreading, I can't control the Indian variant, but I can control me wearing a mask or me keeping socially distant or whatever. So
exactly. And I think it's a fantastic tool for thinking about as we emerge from the pandemic, when things have been in such flux and such uncertainty. This can help us to sort of reset our understanding of our world, if you like, and recognize, because so much has been taken out of our control. Actually, now things are being given back to us by we're getting our lockdown freedoms back. So we have to almost reset and say, okay, so what can I do now? And think through on an emotional level as well as on a practical and legal level. What can I now do? So thinking about the uncertainty over the last 12 months, I'm just going to share a quick poll, and also thinking about this in the context of the tool that we've just shared. We'd love to get your perspective on the impact that the last year has had on you and your team. So you can select as many of these as you like, as many of them as that apply to you. So take a look at the list. Do you need to scroll? You may need to scroll slightly to get to the last couple of comments there. Feel free to share anything else, any other responses to this question in the chat, and feel free to start filling that in now. Which of those stands out for you, Angela?
Well, I was looking at because I'm thinking I can tick all of them, but some of them really resonate more than others. So the feeling worn out. I remember I supported this psychological survey by the BPS over lockdown and how people were coping during lockdown. And so often I'd be either feeling worn out or feeling really positive. And I realized it's because I was choosing to feel positive about, at least I'm locked down with people that I love and I have a garden that I can escape to. And, you know, which kind of takes you back to the what can you control, what can you influence is right. What I could control was how I felt about, you know, how I felt about things by focusing on what was positive in life.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. Well, we've had a lot of responses come through. So I'm going to close this and share the results. So you should now see those on the screen. I don't think there's any surprise that most of us will be feeling a bit worn out by the experience. So well done to you for joining the webinar today, because hopefully you're going to get some tools and resources to begin to overcome that sense of feeling worn out and to recharge your resilience batteries, if you like. And I was really pleased, Angela, that you put as one of the options on here, better physical or mental health, because I know a few people who feel that this experience has somehow strengthened them, either because they've had to overcome so much and they've discovered some inner strength because of it, or because they've made the most of the time that it's been given them, that has been given to them, and they have been able to do something new. Like I've taken up piano, so I actually feel quite excited about the future because of that. Because I've booked my grade 3 piano exam, and you know I've moved at pace through that, so I'm quite excited about that. But of course, the majority of us, as well as maybe feeling those sorts of emotions, those positive emotions, are also feeling worn out. We're also missing social connections. We're also feeling that, you know, anxiety about our roles, or sometimes feeling that maybe even if sometimes we're feeling positive, sometimes we're not. And actually, leadership in the context of uncertainty is about holding that tension, both within ourselves, but also recognizing it within our wider team. And we've had a comment come through. I've expected positive opportunities to emerge as a result of a difficult situation. It's only a situation that we choose how to respond to. Good things always come out of adversity. Yeah, I think that's true. I do. And I think that I guess for a lot of us, it can be very hard to see that positive and to be able to step into that positive mindset if things just feel constant. And that's why we called the resilience workbook that we've sent you, Have You Hit the Wall? Because actually a wall can feel like a really tough thing to get around, and it kind of captured the essence of what we were hearing from our clients and our contacts in industry at the time, that actually they just felt like, I don't know how I can keep going. I thought it would be over within 3 months. I thought it would be over within 6, thought it'd be over within 12, and it's still going on. So yeah, it is about how we respond, but it's also about recognizing that it can be really hard to respond in a positive way all the time. Hopefully we're going to give you some tools both in the resilience workbook and also on the webinar today to help build your resilience to respond positively more often, but crucially not to beat yourself up if you don't, because that'll only make your negative response worse. So thank you all so much for engaging with the poll. I'm going to stop sharing it now. So hopefully that's disappeared from your screen. If it hasn't, you should find a little red box to click to make that disappear. So I mentioned earlier, I've mentioned it a number of times, and if you've been on our webinars before, you'll have heard us talk about it, but Leadership 4.0, leading in times of uncertainty. We wrote this thinking about the uncertainty that would come from Industry 4.0, but of course it's really come into its own in the context of COVID-19 and with the other emerging uncertainties that are going to hit us. It's going to come into its own even more. So if you were on our webinar last week, you'll have heard us talking about leading in head versus leading in heart, and actually concluding that it's not a versus at all. It's not a competition. It's about leading in head and leading in heart. Today we're talking about leading in health, so we'll dig into the detail of that in a moment. And then leading in habit is really about making everything that we talk about in these webinars into something that is more than just a webinar experience, but something that you do in a day-to-day basis. And it's also about continually learning and continually building practices that will actually enable you to lead your team effectively. And finally, leading in history is all about purpose. And you'll see a tool in your resilience workbook that is about why you do what you do. We're going to talk about that in the webinar on leading in history in the middle of June. But of course, if you want to engage with it sooner, you're more than welcome to. So that's Leadership 4.0, and I will hand over to Angela to start to talk to us about leading in health in more detail.
Thanks, Joe. And the way we developed Leadership 4.0 is we researched leaders who were still leading very successfully despite all these disruptive times. So despite what was going on in the world, they were still managing to really bring their teams along, really helping them follow their vision. And that was the key things about our 4.0 leaders is their mindset. So if you look at the circles of influence and control, they were very good at focusing on what it was they could control and what it was they could influence. And that gave them more energy to actually be able to, make change happen and to stay agile. Because that's one of the things that we're hearing is just how exhausting it is. I've got to be agile, but the rules keep changing and, it can feel overwhelming. And their mindset was very much about, focus on what I can control and what I can influence. And one thing that they were very good at controlling was their own personal development and developing their influencing skills, so that your circles of control and influence could broaden further. And one of the key things, why am I talking about that in terms of leading in health, is because health has gone from being something about health and safety. Do you remember the days of health and safety? And your health and safety training was all about, how to make sure you mopped up the floor and how to use a ladder safely. And, it was all about preventing physical accidents and physical illness. So thankfully, when we talk about health, the world has moved on. And in the workplace, we're really talking about mental health and resilience. But Joe and I were talking about this the other day and saying that often when people talk about mental health, they're still talking about preventing mental illness. So it's lovely that organizations are talking more about well-being now and how, it's a much more proactive mindset about how can we have fun at work? How can we enjoy work? Because we know that the healthier, the happier people are at work, the more productive and more engaged they are. So this is why it's absolutely key that we're leading in health. And just a few figures to share with you here. So when we did our research in 2019, we found that, so this is pre-pandemic figures, that even then, the cost to the UK, cost to UK employers was £42 billion. And that was just mental health. It's incredible, isn't it, to think of that? And I thought this was an interesting figure to look at. So of that 42 billion, 7 billion was absence and 29 billion presenteeism. It's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of it was people were still turning up for work, but just weren't giving their all. And again, this is where the leadership makes a massive difference. How can you make it so people are not just turning up, so they're not just signing off sick, but they're actually really engaged with work and really with you and really supporting each other. A few more figures to share with you. Now, it's really hard to do 2019, 2020 comparisons because I'm going to use that word, unprecedented. But even in 2019, the study by Forbes showed that 80% of workers expected their employers to help them manage their work-life balance. So it's probably even higher now. And since then, the CIPD have done a health and wellbeing at work report that has come out very recently. And this is amongst HR professionals, but it's interesting that they say now 50% of organizations actually have a wellbeing strategy. So they're actually getting more strategic about wellbeing, not just a tick box of have you done your health and safety training. And again, what was interesting, we pulled out that 75% of respondents said it was on senior leaders' agenda, and that's really jumped up from 61% over the year. Probably not surprising because of COVID-19. So where someone earlier said that good things can come out of adversity, well, hopefully this is one of them. And then 60% of respondents also said that their line managers appreciated the importance. So it's on senior leaders' agenda, but only, should I say only, 2/3 of line managers think it's important. I'm hoping that because you're here, you're one of that 2/3. But at least it's going up, and going up quite rapidly, that line managers just see just how important it is to really look after your team and look after their well-being, because you're paid back in terms of them supporting you, them being productive and really engaged.
Yeah, can I just chip in there, Angela?
Yeah, of course.
Statistics, I was surprised how high they were. I wonder if one of the next steps that organizations are going to need to take is translating things like strategy and agendas and appreciating the importance of things into sort of tangible actions that they're taking as well. And you know, it strikes me that I wonder if you speak directly to individuals in teams about what it is that their line managers do to demonstrate that they appreciate the importance of well-being, there may be a slightly lower number. One of the things that we talk about in our work on culture is, yes, it's all very well to articulate your culture, but you also need to activate your culture. And that isn't just a one-off launch event. That is actually the ongoing action that your leaders are taking, the structures that you put in place in the organization that are then implemented and used on a regular basis. And fundamentally, it's also about making sure line managers are equipped to do the things that need to be done to deliver on the culture. So I think these numbers are great, and I really do hope that they are translating into action that makes a difference to people in organizations as well.
But I think, as you know, it's one thing the organization having the strategy, like you say, it could be brought to life. But one thing it is doing is, this is what people are now expecting to happen. So how do you make this a competitive advantage if it's, well, you should be treating me like that anyway. You should already have a well-being strategy. And again, this is where leaders make a difference. So it's making the most of whatever your organization's offering, but it's also saying, okay, so what do the really exceptional leaders do? Well, number one has to be role modeling. You know, and I had a manager once who was always saying, oh yeah, she go home at 5 o'clock every day, but they went home at 7. They were in at, you know, 7:30 in the morning. You know, they had ate their lunch at their desk. So there was no, you know, they were saying one thing but doing something else. So, you know, it just doesn't work. Of course, there's a balance to be had between role modeling and being, you know, kind of virtue signaling of come on, I only drink smoothies, and I only drink, you know, I only eat a dookie beans or whatever, is kind of you know, not laying it on too thick. But there is something about really demonstrating that you know, you do take time out to go to your kids' sports days when they used to have them, or you know, you do take time out to exercise, to eat well, to hydrate, and so on. So what are you doing to role model it? And then, of course, what we found with the 4.0 leaders was they focused on team members' well-being. And we don't just mean like individual well-being. So we have talked about, you know, checking in rather than just checking up on people, finding out how they are, encouraging their well-being, but also the relationship between team members, which again has really come to light with distributed working, of how well are the team members supporting each other. So it's one thing having a really good relationship with each of your team members individually, but what are you doing to make sure the dynamics are there, that they're supporting each other? Because again, that will, you know, repay you, that you spend less time supporting them, but also they're there to support you too, because it's that gestalt thing of the, and this is where I find it really hard to get the wording right, of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Is that it? Did I get it right around?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Cool. And then psychological safety. Again, I think we need to kind of start flipping this one on its head and talk about psychological well-being. But psychological safety was something, again, that Leadership 4.0 talked about making it safe for people to share their concerns, for people to challenge, to people to put forward ideas when they can see improvements. That is it safe for me to use my initiative? So providing guidelines so people know when they can use their initiative and when they can try new things. So again, yeah, it'd be lovely to turn that on its head and talk about, psychological buzz rather than just safety. Which brings me on to kind of the thrive mindset, that even the 4.0 leaders who were in a place where they needed to kind of consolidate because of what was going on in their industry, and a lot of organizations need to do that now, they still were thinking of the future and how can we not just be safe and be not unwell, but how can we really make the most of this? So again, make the most of the adversity. How can we make the most of remote working or distributed working, or the fact that we've got to change our shifts because of the way that we've got to operate with the hybrid working. So how can we really make the most of what's happening now? And again, these were the key things that came across for us of what distinguished the okay leaders from the really exceptional ones. Does that all make sense, Joe?
It absolutely did, and I think this slide is really important in the context of leading in health in particular. I think it's easy in the world we live in now, with so much around well-being and mental health on the radar on social media, but so much of it seems to me, or at least the stuff I see, I know we all have different echo chambers, but so much of the stuff that I see on my social media feeds is talking about personal well-being, personal resilience, and personal mental health. But of course, the role of a leader isn't just to lead ourselves in the context of leading in health. It's also about leading our teams. And this slide is really important for that. If we are looking after ourselves, then we are role modeling effectively. But we also need to be focusing on our team's well-being. We also need to be creating a culture where it is safe to speak out, where it is safe to express our feelings and our views. And we need to create a culture and have a mindset which is focused on seeing the positives and looking forward and taking a forward-thinking mindset. And that will enable our teams to be led in health and to lead healthier lives themselves. That's why we call this webinar Healthy Leader, Healthy Teams, because there is a symbiotic relationship between the two. But it isn't enough to put your own house in order. You need to be doing that in the context of role modeling to your teams and in the context of being close to your teams and listening to them and supporting them. Thanks, Angela. That's great. So we are going to look at a couple more tools from the workbook. I think we've picked these quite carefully because they actually speak into the idea of leadership and the idea of role modeling. And then, as I say, we're going to use the other two tools in the workbook in future webinars. So the first one we thought we'd look at is reflect on what you can celebrate. Why are we talking about celebrating in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of all of this uncertainty? Why is that something that is worth focusing on? Well, it's worth focusing on because we can learn so much from celebrating. And not only can we learn, but it is a way of recharging our emotional batteries to celebrate our successes. This is slightly different from the practice of gratitude. This is about celebrating what I have achieved, what you have achieved, not what good has come to you. That's useful too. I don't think you need a template for that. So this is about reflecting on what you have achieved and what you can celebrate. And this is another great tool to use with your team. You can do this in 15 minutes at the start of a team meeting. You can do it as a more formal, as a more sort of focused kind of hour of real deep reflection, maybe with one or two of the other tools from the workbook. But the key thing to do is to think about, first of all, think about the challenges that you have faced, that you've overcome. And it's really important to think about the challenges first, because that reminds you how close the wall was, how hard it was to overcome. So you can write down, we've said write down 3 challenges. You can write down 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you want. And we've also said since the start of the pandemic, obviously this workbook that we've sent you was written in the context of COVID-19. So it's kind of COVID specific. We'll be releasing a new one in a couple of months that is no longer COVID specific, and we've focused on all of the other uncertainty that's coming. But you just write down a few challenges that you faced, and then you reflect on what you did to successfully overcome them, to successfully achieve the goal of solving that challenge. This is really important. Don't tell yourself what you could have done better. The fact is that you're reflecting on a challenge which you overcame. This isn't a sort of self-reflection, sort of coaching kind of thing where you're trying to pick holes in what you did so that you can learn from the mistakes. This is actually about learning from the success. And that's a shift in your thinking that may be easy for some people, maybe more challenging for others. And that's why we felt it was important to have a template here, because people who've got a reductive mindset like myself will automatically be thinking, well, there was that challenge, and now that I'm looking back 6 months later, I could have done it so much more efficiently. That's not the point. The point is, you had a challenge 6 months ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever. You overcame that challenge. That's the thing to celebrate here. So now, once you've written down what you did, or once you've reflected on what you did, you simply need to reflect on how it felt. So now we're connecting with what Eggersheim would call the emotional root. We're getting deep into ourselves to seek to understand what was the emotional connection that we felt to the challenge and to the solution, and how did that make us feel when we overcame that challenge. So it's when you connect to the emotional root of that experience that you start to recharge the battery. And that's why we don't want to focus on what we could have done better. That's not what this activity is about. This activity is about learning how it feels to do something and to overcome a challenge and to be successful in overcoming that challenge. So note down a few of the feelings that you had. Sorry, Angela, go for it.
I was just going to say, it also lets you know that you might have put feelings of, well, I felt really frustrated, and then but then when I succeeded, this is how I felt. And it just remind you that you can overcome all those feelings, which takes us back to the kind of control circle of you do have the resources to overcome these challenges and overcome the feelings that you felt.
Absolutely. And this is one of the tools, just going back to Manpreet's point about the way we respond to things. This is one of the tools that we can use to build that habit, to build that practice of responding positively to situations that we overcome, rather than constantly looking at how we could do better. Don't get me wrong, there is a place where it's appropriate to say, well, what could I have done better here? But I'll tell you, that sits firmly in leading in head. So we're focusing on leading in health today. So once you've once you've thought about the emotions that you were feeling in response to the challenge and when you overcame it, you simply need to step away, make yourself a cup of tea, and come back to your list once you've made the cup of tea and just look at it and just reflect on how it felt, what you did, and what you successfully overcome. Reflect and celebrate. So the template that we've given you is really a means to an end, and the end point is that you have got in front of you this journey that you've been on, this success that you have achieved, and you can just reflect on it. And I'll give you an example. And there's a story I usually tell about myself, but I'm gonna give a really great example that I heard from someone at McDonald's. We did some work with them late last year, focused on well-being and resilience, and we used this book, the workbook with them. And we made some videos with some of their colleagues, both from head office and from restaurants across the country. And there was one chap who we interviewed, and he suffers from mental health issues and depression. But he said that one thing that he has made a commitment to doing is when he gets up in the morning, he makes his bed every single day. And then when he gets home at night, he looks at the bed and says, yes, I achieved at least one thing today. Whatever else happened, I achieved that. And that is about making this practice, this template that I've got here. That's about making this into a habit, which we're going to talk about a lot more next week. And you can see how incredibly interwoven these practices are. But leading in health, you do this practice, you use the template a few times, and before you know it, you'll just be doing this. You'll be celebrating constantly. And that's what we're trying to build up here, that resilience and that emotional battery and that way of recharging the emotional battery.
And I think what you highlighted there, Joe, was about how the challenges are personal to you. Because what's a challenge to one person is a doddle to somebody else. So I had a team leader who shared with me that a month ago they did the marathon in a month. You know, where you ran, I think you ran a mile a day, and it built up to having run a marathon, and that was that amazing achievement. And again, shared it with the team. There's no pressure for them to join in, but said, you know, why not do what you can do? So don't set it as a marathon, set it as, and again, it was, everyone got to personalize it for themselves. And if people didn't want to do it, they just didn't do it. So, but it was just a great, you know, just on WhatsApp sharing, you know, their frustrations or their successes and how they were progressing. And said it was just a really good way of people not talking about work, but talking about their health, because sometimes we get pushback on, well, we don't have enough time to talk about leading in health, we don't have, you know, we've got work to do. Is actually spending time on health and well-being really pays back, because you get so much more in terms of productivity, people preempting problems because they feel they can use their initiative and so on.
Yeah, and actually you mentioned there about you know, using that app with a team. Well, this tool is great for using with the team, and I think you're going to talk us through a tool which is great for using with yourself, but also thinking about those practices of great leaders in terms of leading in health. You use the tool that you're going to talk about, Angela, and I think it helps with role modeling and probably with some of the other practices as well. So over to you.
I like the title of this one because you don't hear the word kind very often in business, do you? And in the workplace. And I just think this is so important about when we, you know, develop culture in organizations. The word kind is coming up more and more. But people say, look, I just want a manager to be kind. You know, I just want to, you know, feel understood. And just I think partly because of the frustrations and the stresses, that quite often people have just been short with each other, and we just need a little bit more kindness. And as this webinar is called, is about, you know, looking after yourself so that you can really build health in your team. It's so important to be kind to yourself. So again, if you've got it in front of you, you can fill it in directly onto the workbook. But the key thing in this is, do you remember the times when we used to be able to fly? And the cabin crew would tell you, look, when the oxygen masks come down, be sure to put it on yourself first before helping somebody else. And we encourage this with leaders as well, is look after yourself first, because so often we see leaders who are just carrying the burden of looking after everybody else and making sure they're okay, but they forget to look after themselves. So again, it's a time to think about being kind to yourself. As Joe said, sometimes we have bad days, and sometimes we just need to say, that's enough, I need some time out. So in this in the workbook or piece of paper, whatever you're using, just have a write down of all the things you could do to take care of yourself. Again, you're in control of these. What could you do to take care of yourself? So I find during the day, there are times when I just get so tired, and I either phone Zach up and say, cheer me up, Zach, which he always does, or I'll go for a walk, or I'll just give myself a challenge of going out to the garden and looking for what's new, because this is the time of year when new flowers come up. And rather than looking at all the jobs that need doing in the garden, I say, right, I've got to find 3 new things in the garden today. So I've got this list, and I keep adding to it of all the different things I could possibly do to be kind to myself.
It might be nice to get some responses in the chat box. So if anyone has written some things in your workbook or thought of some things that you do to take care of yourself, feel free to type those into the chat box. And Angela, if you talk us through the other column as well, whilst they're doing that, we'll like.
Yeah. So when you've done the list of what you could do, it's important to think about, so what's stopping you doing them? And I found in the very first lockdown, I had lots of colleagues who were doing Joe Wicks in the morning, or going on runs, and I was thinking, oh, I should do that. And I realized that I was using a lot of shoulds. And I realized, right, every time I hear a should or shouldn't, I need to challenge that. Because I thought, if ever there's a time for questioning the rules, now is the time. So again, what's stopping you doing that? And again, are they things within your control? Like mine was about me telling myself whether I could or couldn't do it. Then, you know, take back control and give yourself permission to do them. So we're getting some suggestions.
Yeah, we're getting some comments in. So on the what can I do to take care of myself? Put fresh bed linen on the bed regularly.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
First night, getting in with lovely clean bed linen.
Started yoga. I don't drink. Oh, sorry, just one second. Alexa off. Turn off Alexa, that wouldn't be a bad idea. So put fresh linen on the bed, started yoga. I like structure, so I don't beat myself up if my schedule doesn't go to plan. I think that's really
forgiving yourself is so important, isn't
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, you know, putting things in the calendar can help some people, but it doesn't necessarily help everyone. What can stop me feeling like I have too much to do and can't take time out? Yeah, so I guess there's probably a challenge to yourself there to say, if that's how I feel, what now can I do about it? And maybe looking at some of the things that you are doing and seeing if you can organize them into what's in your control, what's in your area of influence, and what's in the area of acceptance. So then being able to maybe take some of the things out in order to free up some time for yourself. Okay, here we go.
Permission for your team to challenge you.
Sorry?
You can also give permission for your team to challenge you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Say, come on, let's support and challenge each other on this.
And that would be a great example of role modeling as well. Right, Manpreet, you've sent through another. It almost looks like a rap, so I'm gonna go for it.
Great.
So I'm guessing these are things you do. So power nap, meditation, stretching, walks, gratitude, feeding myself wholesome food and drinking water, telling myself I'm loved and loving, that this is in my nature, and practical one, book days off. I love it. Thank you. Brilliant. So another one that is something that I maybe need to do less of, I think, is feeling like I need to take care of others and that my own well-being has to wait. I think that is, you know, again, going back to what Manpreet said earlier, you know, that's a mindset piece. And hopefully this tool can help you to identify that and then overcome it. But thank you so much for those comments, everyone. That was great. So just to summarize, Leadership 4.0. As you know, we talked today about leading in health, and I hope you find those tools really, really helpful in thinking about your own health, but also in how you can lead your team in health. The tools in the workbook that I've sent you are entirely usable with a team. They're also usable as individuals. You could use them with your family. So I really do hope that you get some great use out of those. We talked about leading in head and leading in heart in a previous webinar, which is on our YouTube page. Habit and history are coming up in the next few weeks. And we also have a scorecard. Now this scorecard is in beta mode and it's actually going to change in the next few days. So if I were you, I would wait a couple of days and I'll send you the link when we've made the changes. But we've already had some amazing feedback from some of the people I can see on this call.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
And it really helped us to work out what needed to change, and we've made the change. We're in the process of making the changes, so look out for my email in a couple of days, and then complete the scorecard and see how you do with it. Upcoming webinars are on the slide right now. We've got one next week on the 1st of June, and then we've got a bit of a break, and we're back on the 15th of June for How Do We Make History. Angela, you're not with us next week, are you?
I'm on holiday, Joe.
You're taking some time out, much needed. So we'll be joined by my colleague, Zach, who's our capability director. He's an absolute genius when it comes to forming positive habits. And yeah, it's going to be great to host with him next week. Now, you'll have noticed that I have just rattled through those last few slides. There's a very important reason for that. You all signed up for a webinar that was stretching from 11 until 12 o'clock. Now, I'm giving you 11 minutes back in your day for something very important. I'm not just giving this to you so you can get on with your day. I'm giving this to you so that you can take some time out. I really want you to go away from this webinar. Just take the last 10 minutes that you would have spent on the webinar in any case. Maybe go and make yourself a hot drink, sit with it, hold it in your hand, whatever you're going to do to relax, and just reflect on what we've heard today, on your leadership style when it comes to leading in health, and maybe reflect on some of the tools in the workbook. Maybe do some of the tools in the workbook and take that time. I think it's a really valuable thing to do. So I'm going to do the same. Angela, I hope you're going to do the same as well.
And at the end of workshop, say, go on, what one thing are you going to do differently now? So those are 10 minutes to...
Great question. Spend 10 minutes thinking about one thing you're going to do differently.
And next week, you'll find out how to turn it into a habit.
Absolutely. Yes. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to close the meeting and trust that you are going to go off and spend 10 minutes reflecting. So have a great rest of the day and have some great reflection time. Take care, everyone.
Great. Be kind to yourselves all afternoon.